America, congratulations. You made it to 250. And you know what? American brands should be celebrating too. Pat yourselves on the back. You are a key part of what makes our country such a major influence around the world. But what comes in the next 250 years for American brands and for the people who buy them? That's a trickier question and one we're going to dive into today. Hi, welcome to Insights to Activate, Ipsos' series focusing on some of the biggest topics facing the world. I'm Ben Meyerson, Vice President of Marketing and Communications here at Ipsos, and I'll be your host as we talk about American brands and how they can continue to win the hearts and minds of Americans. We have a great group of Ipsos experts here today to break it down for you. But before we get to our panel, let me set the stage by diving into the challenges facing American brands and how you can push ahead. Last year, Americans' trust in our homegrown brands was 9 percentage points higher than international brands. But that advantage has evaporated. Americans now say they trust international brands roughly the same as they trust homegrown brands. So, how can American brands connect with their own people, especially key younger audiences, and gain that trust back? Leaning on Americana may be a difficult route. Younger Americans are far less likely than baby boomers to say that being an American is an important part of how I think about myself. But there are clear ways to lean into sentiments and gain trust at home. Americans still see the country's success as tied to the success of its brands. Nearly 3 in 4 Americans, including solid majorities of Gen Z and millennials, believe this. And as homegrown brands reach for U.S. audiences, those that have their products made in America get an extra chance to win. While not all American brands make their products in the U.S., those that do tap into a premium aura that can be a powerful co-benefit. Solid majorities of Americans think American-made products are higher quality, and they say they like buying American goods, even if the cost is higher. Still, there are many more pitfalls American brands must deal with as they consider how to market themselves in America's next era. Minefields on everything from politics to pricing. So, let's meet our experts and get into it.
Alec Tyson, lead pollster at Ipsos Public Affairs. What we do each day is help our partners tell their story with confidence in the public affairs arena.
And hi, my name is Chris Murphy. I lead our market and brand group globally and looking really forward to the forecast of the next 250 years for a way to set the bar high there, dude. Yeah, all right.
We'll get there. All
right.
No pressure. Ann Mitchell, joining from the reputation practice. My team works with organizations and helping them understand the state and dynamics of trust and how they optimize that for their business's benefit.
Great group here. A lot of different expertises, so I'm really looking forward to getting into this. Let's start with you, Alex. So your team was behind a big America 250 survey we did earlier this year, and we saw some major generational splits in that report. What do you think that means for the future of America and American values?
Well, it's a big question, and let's start with what we find. America 250 is this milestone moment for us, but it's also a time, as I think many people experience, where we're having some debates in this country, and we don't necessarily agree on what our shared national story is, and in some sense that presents challenges for brands. How do you engage with identity or connection to this country in the moment that we're living through? And that's what I really like about this research, is I think it provides some insights or some help to navigate this pretty complex landscape, I think it's fair to say. And what we found at a top line level is some of the foundational ideals and values of the country, ideals like equality, economic opportunity, democratic governance, religious pluralism, they remain really widely resonant. And that's important because what it is 250 years later, the American idea, it remains resilient. At the same time, what we also see is not everyone is feeling a strong personal connection to the country today. And we really see that where you went with your question in the generations data. When you look at Gen Z, when you look at younger millennials, if you ask them, is being American an important part of how you think about themselves? It's a bit of a shrug. Fewer than half say, yeah, that's a really important way that I think about myself. And many in the younger generations are feeling other frustrations about how well the country is delivering on its promises. Not the promises itself, what they largely align with, but how well it's delivering for them. Things like economic opportunity or the job market today. Just think of the job market today. AI disruption, other challenges. It's a tough market for people starting their careers. And so what the research points to is really this nuanced landscape where one note efforts to prime patriotism and pride, they might meet with some limited success, or maybe not as much success as you would have liked, because not everyone's in that mood. Some are, some aren't. You need to know the landscape well with good research to know where to activate. And what I would say to bring the work together is there really is opportunity here. Some of these founding value and ideals are deeply resonant. There's hope in the country for the future. That's almost been a perennial sense. It's part of what it means to be American, in my view, at least, is hope for the future. That's still out there. You just need to know the landscape to know where to connect to have the most impact.
The economic opportunity thing is really interesting to me. Because, I mean, ultimately today we are talking to our brand colleagues and how they tie into all this and what it means to be American. And again, we look at those generational splits and we saw that, like I mentioned earlier, thinking about being American is something that the younger generations don't think about as much, but they do think about American brands and the economic parts of success, even if maybe it's a little out of reach sometimes. What do you see in that?
I think you're just right. You want to talk a little bit more broadly about what's going on in the country. The economy, of course, it's always a perennial concern, but perhaps right now we're at a really acute moment. You can even go back to COVID. Post-COVID, price increases. We've been living through what you could call an affordability crisis for about 4 years now. So the economic opportunities, the economic pressure is absolutely really salient right now, and that's the context or backdrop for any brand engaging, is to be aware, understand these dynamics and how deep they go and how they affect different cohorts differently. We could talk about generation, we could talk about income or education cuts. Everyone's feeling the pressure, but in different ways, and that's another area in which good research, I think, can help ground your initiative.
Yeah, Ben, if we could, just to quantify the magnitude of a point that Alec made a moment ago, please correct me if I'm wrong, keep me honest here, but I believe about 2/3 of people my age would say being an American's a very important part of our identity. Yeah, is that right?
Yeah.
But as you slide down to Gen Z, it's like, what, 38?
Yeah, it's lower, absolutely.
Almost double. So I mean, this is a very real, quantifiable kind of phenomenon, right? We're not just talking in generalities. Now, also important to remember that just because 2/3 of boomers, Gen Xers might feel that's an important part of identity, and doesn't mean it's a universal truth, right? So let's not go painting generations with a perfect brush, right, or a universal truth brush, because that's not right. But yeah, 2/3 to 1/3. That's a real thing.
It's a real thing, and I couldn't be better said. And that's just the landscape that the research points to. Is you can over-index on these trends, and as Chris is suggesting, you can't paint with too broad a brush. You need to acknowledge the nuances. But even each group, there are limits. It's not a universal feeling. I would underline that point. I really agree with that.
And there's a question also of life stages, right? Is this something that younger people, because they have not been around as long, because they have other concerns, or they're dealing with other challenges, they're less concentrating on that? Or is it really purely about when they grew up and like the circumstances in the world around them? I mean, these are things we evaluate.
Well, I was talking with Ann just before we started here, and that was something we were discussing, because it's an open question. There are two things. It could be that as folks age, the younger generations age, they deepen a connection with the country. We've seen that with some past generations, including baby boomers, but it's unknown at this point. So that's something for us as researchers, for brands to watch. What is the evolution of these younger generations? I don't think we know for certain.
Yeah. Chris, I'll throw this to you now. This is a pretty good segue, I think, into where you stand. Obviously, you're out there talking to our brands every day that we work with, and you've been working on the Brand America research that we've been doing for the last year and a half or so. When you talk to our clients out there, what are you hearing about them as they think about how to position themselves as an American brand, or what it means to be an American brand right now?
Well, taking that question to its extreme, some clients will actually ask, should I be wrapping myself in the American flag these days, especially those that are more steeped in Americana and heritage. And the answer in the vast majority of cases is, I'd be careful about that right now, because as you noted in your preamble, division is at an all-time high, even on what it means to be an American, right? So yeah, that's something we might want to take great care with right now. And I'll come back to the brand issue in a moment, but just to highlight the degree of division right now. You go back to 1960. University of Michigan study of parents with children who were about to be of marrying age. And the question is, hey, If your child were to marry somebody from the opposing political party, would that bother you? The people who said, yeah, that would bother me, it was like in the single digits, maybe 10%, 10%. Just a generation later in the mid-90s, that had gone up, let's say substantially. Okay, it's a very, very different world that we're living in now, where contempt for people who are of a different political party is quite high, which makes it very hard to be an all-American brand. Are you really going to try to appeal to all American? That's a tough thing to do right now. It doesn't mean it can't be done, but it's tough. There are some universal American properties that are still resonant here and travel well abroad, across the waters. Things like freedom, innovation, the notion of America as a melting pot. These are still very strong and generally universally, kind of well held qualities, and they do translate overseas quite well too. But yeah, it's a tougher thing, and the data that you were referencing earlier, it's very powerful, right? So just 1 year ago, we do our little Trust in American Brands study. And right here on our own shores, if a brand was perceived to be American, it had a 9-point trust advantage across a series of brands, right? 1 year later, that's at a -2. So it's actually a little bit worse, right? So you got an 11-point swing in just 1 year. And that's right here on our own shores, where more people are saying, they would trust a brand if it were international as opposed to being homegrown. So I think that says quite a lot. Now, in terms of the international game, that's a very different question. You want to do that one later?
Sure, no, let's do it, yeah.
All right. So looking across 15 countries, if you ask people the degree to which they trust major American brands, and then go a layer deeper and say, all right, do you consider that brand to be American, international, or local? Go in and start making comparisons amongst those groups. People on international soil give 20 percentage points less in trust to brands they perceive as American compared to brands that they perceive as international. Same brand, same question, just whether you see it as an American brand or international. 20-point differential, that's pretty massive.
That's stayed consistent year over year, though, right? I think it was
that did stay consistent.
Yeah,
exactly.
And that was
yes,
it was we fielded in, was it 10 countries last year and 15 this year?
Correct.
Yeah. So at the very least, that's not moving as compared to the drop in Americans' trust in their own brands, which is particularly interesting. International folks, obviously that's a big role in what we play. I mean, the story of American brands overseas is, especially in the post-World War II era, it's the story of America. I mean, that's, that in the era of soft power and transforming the way things work around the world, a big part of that was, Hollywood, international culture, other large brands that we work with who might be sold in supermarkets and restaurants around the world. So the shift in trust there is interesting. But again, and I think one interesting rub to me is that we didn't declare this is an American brand, this is an international brand. We asked people to declare whether they thought the brand was local or international, which I think was an interesting exercise, right? It's like, because, and I'll leave to you whether we talk about the specific brands or not, but I mean, I think that allowing people to say, well, maybe this brand might be headquartered in the US, but I think of it as an international brand and thus I trust it more. That's an interesting wrinkle in terms of how brands position themselves going forward.
But yeah, you got it right. So the question sequence was, okay, here's a collection of brands. Talk to me about the degree of trust that you have in each of these brands. And then at the very end of the exercise, okay, let's go through each of these brands. Now tell me, do you see it as international? So we didn't do anything to tip them off, right, before the trust exercise. So this is just, purely unbiased kind of read on each of these brands and then cutting it after the fact. And that's what you see.
And I think we know something about why this might be, or what's behind the reason. Why is this the case, this trust differential between?
Why, Alan?
Yeah, why, exactly. That's a great question. And so, you look around the world and you do see some frustrations with America generally today, right? And there are different reasons for that. But that connects to this idea of brand American facing some headwinds internationally. So the question is, how do you navigate that? What do you do with that? And that's where I like some of the work that Ann has done in terms of knowing your audience authentically or what your brand stands for. I think that's part of the solution about how you navigate some of the headwinds that brand America is facing internationally.
Yeah, and definitely, let's jump in here. So let's talk about the corporate reputation side of things here. So obviously you're doing so much work on trust, but I mean, as companies navigate this, so much of it comes down to the importance of getting that messaging right. What are you hearing from corporate communicators about how they are dealing with geopolitics and brand presentation around the world?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, of course, the main line of feedback we get is that it's more complicated than it's ever been in the past. It can feel like you can't say the right thing. And, I think as what, the two panelists here are alluding to is that, different stakeholders want different things from you. So I think we're also operating in a really challenging environment given, how fractured the media landscape is, how the information environment is changing, how hard it is to understand what is true. I think that, especially from a corporate communications perspective, that means that the narrative is much more challenging to control than it has been in the past. But I think kind of picking up on what Alec was planting there, I think we see corporate communicators tend to do two things in an environment like this, and really all the time. The first is understand what drives trust, not just the state of trust, but what drives trust with different stakeholder groups that matter most to you. So that's more than just customers, that's investors, that's policymakers, other groups that are important to you, and really understanding what they expect of you and what's going to drive trust in every transaction that you have with them. What will they be receptive to? What do they want to hear from you? So that's kind of one key component. And then the other seems so obvious, but worth mentioning because we hear it in all of our work, is that you need to have a clear and consistent framework that you follow consistently when you're determining what you speak up about and how you do that. So there are kind of three key questions that I hear our clients come back to most often. Obviously, this looks different in every organization, but the first is this related to my core business? So is this connected to how we have talked about our strategy historically over a long period of time? And the second big question is about credibility and authenticity, which I think we're seeing, as a big American value across groups right now. People are really craving that. So from a corporate communications perspective, that's, do we have something credible and authentic to say here? Have we talked about this in the past? How? And can we really show up in a unique and authoritative way? And then I think the third big question is, are we in a position to actually make an impact here, whether that's delivering shareholder value or affecting the change that you're commenting on? And if you can answer those three questions with a yes, I think that there's generally a case to be responding to an issue. But I think the truth is that a lot of things feel really noisy. Executives feel pressure to respond to the environment, but if it is not connected to something that drives trust and it can't pass that litmus test of, is this related to our core business? Do we have something credible to say, authentic to say, and can we really make an impact? Then odds are you need to let that lie.
Yeah. One of the things that I love that your group does every year is the Reputation Council report, where every year you go out and talk to dozens, more than 100 corporate communicators?
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
I mean, so you're in the middle of that right now. You're out there and you're talking to these folks every day who are on the ground dealing with this. Are you hearing anything specifically around how they're dealing with the geopolitical landscape right now and how that talks about how they communicate, how that factors into how they communicate?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that they're getting more pressure from more points in the organization than they have in the past to respond to things, but also in some circumstances to stay quiet. So I think a big concept that we hear from our clients is, do I need to practice strategic silence here? Where do I do that? And our guidance really kind of turns back to that same understanding I was just speaking about. You really need to be rooted in what people expect to hear you talk about, what they expect to see you invest in, and understand not just the perceptions, but the state and dynamics of trust with those various groups. And that becomes your filtering mechanism and really, a focusing exercise of what you speak up about and how you speak up about it.
Do you think the silence is temporary?
It's interesting. So as Ben was mentioning, we have these conversations with heads of corporate affairs and corporate communicators every year. And, I think, certainly if we look back a few years, maybe it's 5-6 years back, there was a moment where people felt, the expectation was to speak up on more. We've certainly seen that taper off over the last couple of years. But I wouldn't say that the things that we're hearing from these clients are, you need to be quiet about everything. It's really more about core business, credibility, and authenticity. I think there's really a return to that. I think most of them are relieved in a lot of ways to hear there's a re-emphasized focus on that, because that's where they feel they're able to actually make an impact. So I think in some aspects, yes, strategic silence is here to stay, but really what that means, said another way, it's let's focus on the core business, let's focus where we're credible.
Selective silence.
Yes.
Very nice.
Well,
Okay.
a question for Ben and Ann, but I wonder how many companies aren't quite clear on the drivers of trust or how they're different depending on the constituents, as Ann has suggested, because trust is used so ubiquitously in our field, but sometimes I wonder what that specific definition is. Are we talking about visibility? Are we talking about product quality or integrity? Or are we talking about something related to social stance? And I think that's what our work, Ann's work, good research can help folks do, is understand what the drivers of trust actually are for your particular group.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, for most commercial brands, again, no universal truths here, but the general tendency when we go in and we play our little structural equation games and figure out what's driving what, the drivers of trust are usually repetitive good moments. Being able to do good things, to deliver consistently, but yeah, repetition's a big part of it, right? 9 times out of 10, trust is built on the back of repetitive good behavior. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. We say often in our team that trust is built through a million moments, a million transactions over a very long period of time. So I think that consistency, credibility, authenticity is so important. But I think to what Alec is saying too, we tend to think about it in sort of, trust is what do you do, how do you do it, and why do you do it? There are so many dimensions and attributes that sit beneath that, and they look really different. What matters looks really different for a pharmaceutical company versus an oil and gas company. And even then still, it depends on sort of your track record, what has happened to you in the recent past, and sort of the macroeconomic environment, the social political environment. So there's so many factors. There's certainly a framework that all companies can consider when they're thinking about how to diagnose trust in their organization, but we certainly feel that there's a lot of nuance depending on your specific stakeholder and business environment.
I will say this, if I'm trying to build trust with you, I would rather miscommunicate than misbehave, if you know what I mean.
Like that.
The point being, what you put out there in terms of advertising or PR, I would much rather have a mistake there than in your day-to-day interaction with a brand and its performance. You might tend to forgive me a little bit more if I have a stumble of the tongue. You know what I mean? Yeah.
And so let's go back to the brand America aspect of this, right? Like, so would you categorize tying into, let's say, an America 250 campaign? There's certainly brands that are evaluating whether or not this was the right place for them to play as the anniversary came. How do you think that those played in your conversations out with brands? Have you talked to any specifically that have been weighing whether or not to go into this?
How hard to play the 250 card?
Yeah.
I think, didn't you have some research that showed like 19% of Americans said they intended to goose their purchases around it?
Well, absolutely.
Around 250,
That's
yeah.
exactly right. His facility with numbers is amazing, but that's exactly right. But yeah, 1 in 5 saying that this is a moment where they are more inclined to either purchase or change their behavior around the 250 anniversary or marker. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, is that a big number or is that a small number? Let our audience decide.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
It's not zero.
as it's not
It's
zero.
20% behavior change. Maybe you're picking up some folks that were already planning on doing it anyway, or letting us know. But it's not. I think a lot of brands would be happy for a 20% lift, depending on what they're looking at, if indeed it was that.
Well, and again, back to how can research help partners is 20% at the top line level, but as we're talking, we know that segments operate a lot differently. So if back to who's your audience, how are you expected to show up, what are they looking for from you? It may be that your demographic, that's 30%, or it may be that for your demographic, it's 5%, and that can really shape your decision making.
And I think if you want to go there on the 250 thing, if I turn back the clock to my commercial brand management days, if I did it, I would want to be very careful to tie it to my brand's role in the construction of this country. I would make it about the country. I would not make it about leadership affiliation.
I mean, I love that answer because it just speaks to what we found, which the founding values and ideals are deeply resonant and continue to be so. And we have some strong conversations ongoing elsewhere, but these founding values and ideals, they endure.
And I'm going to misquote a number in a minute. He's going to pound me.
You're on a roll so far.
Made that one up, dude.
Oh, your track record is perfect right now, so let's just keep rolling.
Let's just y'all talk.
Yeah. All right. Well, as we get into the next phase here, let's see if we've got any questions from our audience here. All right, and I'm going to go right back to you with this one, Chris. Some of the strongest American brands spent decades trying to look international. If they want to win here in America, should they change gears and focus on audiences at home again?
If they want to win here,
In the US,
should they focus on audiences?
Yeah.
That's the question.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about how there's an uphill climb internationally and increasingly in America as well.
Yeah, these formats don't lend themselves very well to one-word answers, do they? But the answer is yes.
Yes.
But here's the deal. I'm going to go back to your data yet again. I really liked your study, as you could probably tell. There's not that many Americans who do get all wrapped up in the American flag. Well, like 31% say that's a big deal to them, right? But 68% of Americans will say, hey, help me achieve my goals, right? Help me get ahead. That is still a very American concept. So to tie it back to that question, it is very important that American brands, or anyone marketing on our soil for that matter, really understand how their brand is facilitating their customer's story, what are their goals, how am I facilitating the accomplishment of those goals. That's huge, okay? But that's a very different thing than waving the stars and stripes around. And make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Alec, what are you seeing? I mean, are you seeing any interest in people looking at those brands and what kind of opportunities that could be?
Well, I might pick up on our last answer, which is it's hard to understate this economic moment. And if there's an aspect of the promise of America that Americans maybe are most frustrated right now, it absolutely is that economic mobility piece of that, or how can I achieve success? We can talk about a lot of things. We can talk about housing, cost of education, just the daily cost of living. But to the extent that you can address people's concerns in an authentic way, and yes, the economy is always a perennial issue, but it's at a particular moment right now where folks are really frustrated. It's connected to how they feel about the country. It's connected about how they feel about the promises and ideals of the country. So it's a challenge and an opportunity. It's a challenge because you need to be careful because people have strong feelings, but it's an opportunity, as we just talked about. If you can connect authentically with them about their story and their story of success, it's a powerful thing.
Yeah.
I mean, in corporate comms, obviously, there's so much discussion, and there's obviously discussion lately about how much closer comms folks are getting to the CEO because of the importance. When you look at that layer of messaging, like when you're talking to comms folks, are they mostly focused on the international aspects? Or are they focused on like appearing more in the country that they're from? What are the comms folks looking at in terms of this?
Yeah, I think something that, we talk with them a lot about is how do you balance, kind of managing a global master brand and then your local market brands. And that comes from everything of, just how you talk about the table stakes of the business here versus abroad. But also, what do decision rights look like when something goes wrong somewhere else in the world? So I think that there's, what we tend to see is that there's a little bit of both, but perhaps more than in the past. That local lens really matters a lot. The messaging that, a large technology company is having with its U.S. audience doesn't look like it looks in the EU, for example, for a lot of reasons. So I think that we're certainly seeing more nuance there than there has been in the past. But, I think it kind of goes back again to what we've been talking about here is you really have to do the work of understanding what the expectations are in the market of very specific stakeholders and look at, not just the economic or political environment in those markets, but specifically at what specific stakeholder expectations are in those markets.
So it's less about focusing on one country and identifying your brand with that one country, but it's really about meeting the moment in each place in which you're operating. So you've got folks that are experts in this place, so you can make sure you're optimizing and just connecting in the right ways.
Right. Core values should, of course, be consistent across the board. Your business strategy doesn't look wildly different in one place versus the other, but how you talk about very specific policies certainly will look really different.
Yeah.
Great.
Let's hit another question here. Yeah, I mean, this one is for you again, and I'd say for sure. So, how can corporations make any kind of play on being American when it seems like the country's mood shifts every 4 years? Now, obviously, this talks a little bit about what you're talking about, and that's maybe more of a brand messaging thing. But let's talk about how corporations deal with shifts in the way politics work every 4 years and how they can operate.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think the subtext of the question is sort of to be American is political. And that's certainly true in this moment. I think that's why there's some hesitation around, that's why that discussion is happening with our clients, right? Because they have some fear and anxiety as well as understanding there may be some opportunity on the table. I think our general advice is obviously, don't attach yourself to a political figure a moment. Return to core business values and find ways to connect with your audiences in a way that's really credible and authentic to you that will be enduring. So look for ways to meet that moment that you're experiencing around you, socially, politically. But I think the reminder to brands and businesses is stay focused on your strategy, your values over the long term, and then look for ways to sort of connect into that nuance and how your key stakeholders are experiencing the specific moment we're in, and find ways to show up really credibly and authentically that won't leave you in 4 years feeling isolated.
I love that answer, and what I see on the research that comes across my desk is to really emphasize that there's a hunger in this country for a more unifying message, for more uplifting messages. There's still this optimism, this quintessential American optimism that when we're united, there's almost nothing we can't achieve. So I think brands can be too scared off to engaging with these American themes because of some of reasonable considerations they're having. But when you look at the data, there's also a lot of opportunity, a lot of upside there.
We've got time for one more question here. So, Alec, let's throw to you here, Alec. So this is a key one. So one of the things that you do, I'll throw this to you because your team handles a lot of our consumer confidence data. The economy is flailing right now. You talked about American brands and premiumization and just being out there in terms of being an American brand that might cost a little more. But how do brands play there in this kind of economic climate?
Well, I've learned a lot from my Ipsos colleagues in my time here on just these questions, and part of what we're seeing that reflects the social and political trends, but also consumer behavior is to some extent a bifurcation. Big word, right? But that there's still an appetite for premium products and experiences, and I guess I would underline experiences. But also consumers are really feeling the price pressures, high prices, this affordability moment that we've talked about. So both can be true at the same time. And I'm really curious to hear Chris and Ann on this one, because I see that data every day, and how you activate on that, how you strategize on that, I think is an important question. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, it kind of comes back to what we were talking about, and understanding expectations and really understanding specifically what drives trust. And, for some, cost matters a lot, but it's also how do you communicate your value? How do you sort of connect to, what your value is in an authentic way and communicate that?
So we got to the closing question without bringing up the Donald, but we're going to do it now. You talked about price pressure. If you think about the last time he took office, job one was not a series of tariffs, right? But in 2025, they came fast, they came furious, and they came in many, many places. And what does that do? I mean, that hits people square in the wallet. And for most people, that runs counter to those goals they're trying to achieve that we talked about before. When we talk about fading trust, is that the number one causal factor or the only? No, but it's part of it. Come on. It is a piece of the equation here. So I think as you've seen presidential approval ratings dip, and seeing trust in American brands dip, a lot of it is tied to the economic suffering that a lot of our colleagues out there feel. Yeah.
Yep. Lots to consider, and lots for brands, I think, to think about as they decide how to progress going forward. But I don't know if we got through the whole 250 years today, but
we didn't. Thanks for letting us
no, I
off the
tried.
forecasting.
I tried to get as close as we could. But thank you all for your insights and for your feedback. I really enjoyed this conversation. So, thank you all.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Pat.
Ben.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us. If you haven't yet, you really should read our companion report, Brand America 250, which shares more great fresh data on how American brands are seen and can succeed at home and around the world. And in just 2 weeks, make sure to come back and explore how to make it in America in the future with a new issue of our award-winning magazine, What the Future, focused on the future of success. I'm Ben Meyerson, and this is Insights to Activate with Ipsos.